At the end of the day, I think what Americans perceive, and you ask me why there is momentum for our campaign, these trade agreements were written by corporate America, were written by Wall Street. The goal was to shut down plants in America, to stop having to pay workers in Iowa, Vermont, this country, decent wages, move to China, pay people low wages, and bring their products back in America.
But supported by Democratic administrations.
You're quite right. Many of these policies, you're absolutely right, many of these policies were supported by not only Republicans, by President Clinton, and unfortunately President Obama. They are bad policies. They are opposed by and large by every trade union in this country, and I believe by the majority of the American people. At the end of the day, the American worker should not be forced to compete against people in Vietnam who make 56 cents an hour minimum wage.
How do you roll back the clock on those agreements?
Well, you renegotiate agreements. And what you say is, look, we want agreements that work for the American middle class. I want to see, we have lost, just to review, since 2001, we have lost almost 60,000 factories in the United States of America and millions of decent paying jobs. Not all of that is attributable to trade, but a lot of it is. And at the end of the day, if corporations can shut down in America, pay people 25 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour someplace else, that's what they will do. And we have got to stop that. We have to demand they reinvest back in this country and provide decent paying jobs here.
Listening to you, no one would doubt that you sound like a Democrat, but you've always identified as an independent. When will you become a Democrat, or when will you put that D behind your name? And do you have to do that soon?
No, we don't. As it happens, I'm obviously running in the Democratic caucus here in Iowa, the Democratic primary process around the country, and we will fulfill all of the requirements that the authorities need us to fulfill. As it happens, as is the case for Howard Dean, who ran for president, for my colleague in the Senate, Pat Leahy, you don't register in the state of Vermont as a Democrat. You just can't do that. Nobody can do that. What you do, and what I have done for years, is been a member of the Democratic caucus in the House and now in the Senate. I'm the ranking member on the Budget Committee, former chairman of the Veterans Committee, where we work very hard for veterans' rights. And I have helped Democrats get elected throughout the state and throughout the country. So I think my credentials are pretty strong.
But Senator Leahy or Governor Dean didn't say they were independent. They said they were Democrats. Why the distinction?
Well, historically, the distinction is, and the reason that I ran as an independent is pretty simple. Over the years, I think the Republican Party has evolved into an extreme right-wing party controlled by the Koch brothers and other billionaire interests who are really very reactionary. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, over the years has also become, I think, too much influenced by big money, and I preferred to be outside of the Democratic Party and run as an independent. That's how I got elected. And I am the longest serving independent. But having said that, I made a decision many, many months ago, after a lot of thought. I think the last time I was in the show, you probably asked me that question. I don't know. But I decided to run within the Democratic primary process. That's what we're going to do, and we're doing pretty well.
There's been much discussion on the Republican side about when and if Donald Trump might run as a third party because of the groundswell that is developing for his candidacy. Would you feel compelled to have a third party candidacy if you do not secure the Democratic nomination?
I made it very, look, we gave a lot of thought about what we're going to do in terms of this election. And I decided finally that we would run within the Democratic process, and that's what I am going to do. I will not, as I have said many, many times, if I do not win, I will not run as a third-party candidate, period.
When you announced that you would support the pact with Iran, the nuclear deal, you said it's not all that many of us would have liked. Is it a good deal, or is it just good enough?
James, I voted against the war in Iraq. I heard the same evidence that everybody else heard. I didn't believe Bush, I didn't believe Cheney, I didn't believe Donald Rumsfeld in what they were saying. And if you go to YouTube and find the remarks that I made on the floor of the House at that point, sadly, and I say this without any joy in my heart, much of what I predicted about the destabilization of the region turned out to be true. As the former chairman of the Veterans Committee, I can tell you that people do not fully understand the cost of war. I mean, it's not just that we lost 6,700 brave men and women in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's the 500,000 that came back with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. I think what President Obama is trying to do is to do everything that he can to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, but do it without another war. I am astounded, I really am, to hear my Republican colleagues go on the floor of the Senate and kind of blithely talk about, well, there's another option. What they're talking about is another war. We were at war in Afghanistan, didn't turn out well. War in Iraq did not turn out well. We do not need another war. Now, I'm sorry,
is this a choice between diplomacy and war?
I think it is. Look, if it fails, who trusts Iran? I don't trust Iran. Nobody trusts Iran. But there are very tight restrictions here in terms of not only releasing, lowering the sanctions, but also the ability to bring them back. So I think you give peace a chance. War is always an option. But in my view, a great nation has got to use every capability that it has to prevent war. War is a terrible thing. And I would like to see us succeed here, as the president is trying to do, without going to war.
You voted for the war in Afghanistan,
Yes, I did.
and you voted against both wars in Iraq in
Yes.
the early 90s and
Right.
a decade ago. What is the criteria that a President Sanders would use for going to war?
I voted against the first Gulf War when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, because I thought with the whole world united against them, the whole world, we could have driven him back without going to war. That was my motive then, and I think I was right. In terms of the war in Iraq, I could not believe the stuff that we were hearing from the Bush administration, and I feared very much the kind of destabilization that would take place. And I voted against that war as well. I voted for the war in Afghanistan because you had a situation where Osama bin Laden was being protected by the Taliban at that point. I think a request had made, he's a criminal. He was not released, and we went to war. So my view is that what we need, by the way, is not the United States, and you can't predict every event that's coming up, but by and large, I would like to see the United States work with the rest of the world, work with our allies in the Middle East, and not have to do it alone.
Diplomacy, though, needs to be backed up, as most view, it needs to be backed up by military strength.
Sure.
Is the U.S. sufficiently militarily strong in order to act that way in leading the world?
Well, I could tell you that the United States now is spending, I believe, more on our military than the next 9 nations combined.
Is it enough? That is, would you increase the strength of the U.S. military?
What I would do is change the priorities of the U.S. military. You're asking me, is it enough? We have elderly people in this country living on $13,000 a year because they don't get enough in Social Security. We have young people who can't afford to go to college. We have people, veterans, sleeping out on the street. So as a nation, we have got to determine our priorities. No, I am not in favor of just simply putting more and more money into the military, but this is what I am in favor of. Right now, you may or may not know that the Department of Defense is the only agency of government which cannot sustain an independent audit. You go there and say, well, where are you spending your money? How many private contractors do you have? They don't know the answer. So before you throw a lot more money into the military, I think you need some accountability, which we do not at the present time have. Furthermore, I think to too large a degree, the United States may still be fighting against the old Soviet Union. Our enemy now is terrorism. It is a very different type of military conflict. So the answer is yes, we need the strongest military in the world. Second of all, I do not believe, everything being equal, we should do it alone. We should work with coalition. France is there, the UK is there, other countries are there. In the Middle East, by the way, people don't know this. Saudi Arabia, this will shock everybody, has the 3rd largest military budget in the world. 3rd largest. You know what? Maybe they want to get their hands a little bit dirty in taking on ISIS with our support without us having to have our ground troops there in combat.
There are Democrats and libertarians who have concerns about the use of drones as part of military operations. What is your view?
I am concerned. I think we have seen situations where drone attacks have ended up doing us a lot more harm than good. I don't think you outlaw the policy at all, but when they can be effective, that's good. But I think when they are killing, as they have done, innocent people, we're seeing women and children being killed, that is not a good thing, and it turns people against the United States. I think you got to be very selective in that area.
Moving from the military to minimum wage, which you spoke of earlier, you want to see a $15 an hour minimum wage. Republicans argue this is a state issue, that states should decide minimum wage, not the federal government. You've called for a national minimum wage. If you become president, it's likely one chamber of Congress will still be in Republican hands. How do you move that issue forward?
Well, two things. I mean, Republicans argue a lot, and usually, just coincidentally, what they end up arguing always benefits the wealthy and the powerful. They argue that climate change is not real, and we need not do anything about it, while they receive huge amounts of money from the Koch brothers and the oil industry. They argue that we should not have pay equity for women workers. They argue that we should, in fact, you know what they argue? Is not only we should not raise the minimum wage, many Republicans will come here and tell you we should abolish the concept of the minimum wage. And if you can find in a high unemployment area workers prepared to work for $3 or $4 an hour, for many Republicans, that's a good idea. But to answer your question, look, $7.25 is now the federal minimum wage. It's a starvation wage. You do the arithmetic, people can't live on it. We have got to raise the minimum wage over a period of years to a living wage, in my view. Maybe it's a radical view. I don't think so. If somebody works 40 hours a week in the United States of America, that person should not be living in poverty. That's what a $15 minimum wage over a period of years would do. Now, you ask me the question, well, how do you negotiate with Republicans? And I'll tell you how. You rally the American people, who overwhelmingly believe, by the way, that the minimum wage should be raised, depending on the polls, maybe to $15 an hour. The Republicans get away with murder. They get away with trying to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, not raise the minimum wage, because people are not organized in opposition to them. When we rally the American people, I think the Republicans will see the writing on the wall. They will come along with us.
Is that how you avoid class warfare? Because what you've been saying here really promotes class welfare.
Class warfare, you mean?
Yes.
Well,
did I say welfare?
You said class welfare. Well, you're right. We have been giving welfare to the very wealthiest people in this country for too long. That's not what you meant. But let me talk about so-called class warfare, okay? I've been accused of promoting class warfare, okay? So let me be clear. Class warfare goes on in the United States right now. The rich are getting much richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is disappearing. In the last 30 years, we have seen a shift, a redistribution of wealth to the tune of trillions of dollars that have gone out of the hands of the middle class and working families to the top 0.1%. The Republican budget passed a few months ago gave over $250 billion in tax breaks to the wealthiest 0.2%, and yet they cut Medicare, they cut Medicaid, they cut healthcare. That's class warfare.
But when you talk about organizing, it sounds to me like you're organizing to go to war.
Well, not to. We're organizing for politics. What do you think is going on today with Wall Street and the billionaire class and the Koch brothers? They are organized. When the Koch brothers, as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, are prepared to spend $900 million in this campaign cycle to elect candidates, Republican candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful, is that not organized? That's organized when you have super PACs. I'm the only major candidate, or one of the only, who doesn't have a super PAC. I don't want money from billionaires. Dean, in my view, that is organized. So what we have seen for many, many years, in my view, is a massive transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 0.1%. You've seen, as a result of Citizens United, billionaires able to try to buy elections in this country. I think we've got to fight back.
I think we've got the point there. I'm going to move directly into politics here. Vice President Biden, how would his entrance possibly into the race affect your candidacy and your campaign?
Good question, and you know what? I honestly don't know the answer. I mean, there are some people who speculate that he would take more votes away from Hillary Clinton. Some people who speculate he would take more votes away from me. I don't know the answer to the question. I'm not much into speculation, but this I will say. I've known Joe Biden for many years, a very decent guy, a friend of mine. We served in the Senate together. And what I will do, you know, you're looking at a candidate who, in the many campaigns I have run in the state of Vermont, do you know how many negative ads I have run? I've never run one, never run a negative ad. I am not taking super PAC money. I don't want super PACs. I run campaigns based on the important issues facing our people. Joe Biden gets in, I can promise Joe, as I have Hillary Clinton, we will run an issue-oriented campaign, not one of personal attacks and negative ads.
Joe Biden reportedly has said that if he decides to get into the race and run for president, he would only serve one term because of his age. You're going to have a birthday in a couple days, and you'll be older than Joe Biden. Not to put a fine point on it, but are you too old to be president?
That's not a fine point.